Washington mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL.
Good morning, everybody. 7:07 on WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. In the 8 o'clock hour, 8:07, we'll be joined by country music 14-time Grammy winner legend Ricky Skaggs. At about 8:30, we're going to get to some word about who's been nominated for Oscar, and then we'll go over all those nominations with Christian Toto. Brian Wilson joined with Larry O'Connor today.
And now joined by Lanny Davis, former White House Counsel for the Clinton administration. And also, I'd like to point out, he was a member of President George W. Bush's Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. I say that because it was one of those across-the-aisle nominations where a Republican picks a Democrat to serve in an important role. And that's what we're seeing right now, Lanny Davis, with President Obama reaching across the aisle and choosing a Republican, Chuck Hagel, to be his defense secretary.
Yes, and I have high regard for Senator Hagel.
And many people in Washington, too. But here's my question for you, Lanny, on this. And good morning, by the way.
Good morning. Good morning, guys.
You know, in the world of talk radio, whenever a caller, you know, you're discussing issues of Israel, when a caller calls in, you instinctively pick up on certain buzzwords that an anti-Semitic caller gives you, and you end up cutting this person off, and you say, no, that's not worthy of discussion. Some of those buzzwords that they say are, they call the Israeli lobby the Jewish lobby. And they start questioning the loyalty of senators or the president by saying, you know, hey, they're not the senator of Israel. They're the senator for the United States of America. These are all sometimes little keywords that get your hair risen as a talk radio host. You say, okay, this guy's about to say something offensive. My concern is, considering the fact that President Obama has a bit of a soft spot there in terms of people wondering whether he's fully on board in protecting Israel or being a strong ally to Israel in these trying times, why would he nominate somebody like Chuck Hagel, who has said both of those things on the record?
Well, I don't know that you shouldn't nominate him, but he should have said, Senator Hagel will explain and will apologize for using a term that is an anti-Semitic canard. That's different than saying that he's anti-Semitic. I don't believe he is, but he may be ignorant of the fact that for literally centuries, if not thousands of years, Jews have been accused of having dual loyalty to whatever country they lived in when they were thrown out of Israel 3,000 years ago in the diaspora. And to this day, the notion that you can't be pro-Israel, but you have to be identified as Jewish. I happen to be Jewish, but the evangelical Christian right is very pro-Israel. It would be offensive to Catholics if you said anyone who is pro-life is part of the Catholic lobby. John Kennedy fought against that kind of stereotype.
That's right.
Why doesn't Chuck Hagel recognize the offense of that term and immediately address it? I've waited since his announcement to now he can do it. He still has not done it. I hope and assume, because he's a good man who I admire greatly, will recognize the deep offense to people like me. I'm in favor of a Palestinian state. I've been very much in the middle, even to the left, on Israel-Palestinian issues. But he deeply offends me by using that expression. I assume he's ignorant. He's not ignorant now that it's offensive. Why doesn't he explain it?
All right, and I really appreciate you coming out strong on that, and that's very strong language, and I agree with you. Again, I ask, though, what about the judgment of the president? Isn't this a sign that he's sort of poking the bear, that he's kind of picking a fight, knowing that this is there? Why does he continue down this path and nominating Chuck Hagel? Why Chuck Hagel? There are so many other great potential secretaries of defense that could bring us together as a nation instead of divide us.
You know, the president won the election, and I wrote in my column, which I hope everybody reads in thehill.com and Huffington Post and elsewhere, that the president has the right to name a cabinet of his choice, but there's a high bar to voting against. And in this case, I would not vote against Senator Hagel. I do expect that he will explain. He's not an anti-Semite, but he's insensitive to that expression, and he does show a tendency on issues to take positions that appear to be anti-Israel. He did not support the declaration of the Revolutionary Guard of Iran as a terrorist organization. Why not? He wants to deal with Hamas, even though Hamas will not recognize the State of Israel. What does he say about that? That can be done in his confirmation hearings. But I do think the president's entitled to the choice of his own cabinet.
And the Senate is entitled to provide its advice and consent.
Absolutely. In the hearings, Senator Graham, Senator McCain, who I also deeply respect, should raise these questions, and Senator Hagel has an obligation. He's a defense secretary for all the American people, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, not to appear to be anti-Jewish or anti-Israel. I don't think he's either one, but it's the insensitivity of the expression Jewish lobby that's so offensive to Jews and non-Jews alike.
I want to get another topic in because it's something that's driving the news cycle right now. That was yesterday. Joe Biden, Vice President of the United States, who's been put in charge of trying to come up with solutions to the problem of perceived gun violence in this country. He's before the cameras and he says the president is going to act, and he made it very clear in that soundbite that the president was going to act through executive order. I have a real problem with that. And I want to know just how far do you think a president can go in a matter like this involving the Second Amendment by executive order?
Well, he can't violate the law. The law is what Congress passes, and presidents through the ages have issued executive orders subject to the authority granted by Congress.
Well, the president by executive order decided he wasn't going to enforce certain immigration laws, and that sort of circumvents the process. There was a law passed. It was the law of the land. It was signed into law by a previous president, and he's choosing not to enforce it. This is an example of how, through the power of the presidency, you circumvent the legislative process, and that's my concern with it.
Look, as long as you and I are both consistent, I have serious doubts about presidents using the separation of powers doctrine, asserting they will or won't enforce laws that are passed by Congress. George Bush did that, Ronald Reagan did that, Lyndon Johnson did that. So it goes back, probably George Washington did that. I have a problem with that, and I hope you do too. But on the other hand, there is something called executive discretion on prosecuting cases. That's what the Justice Department does under Democrats and Republicans. So on a case-by-case basis, Brian, we have to decide whether that discretion is right or wrong, and we can reasonably disagree on enforcing certain immigration laws against people who've been here for 25 years, have been good citizens, and there's no reason to throw them out of the country.
All right, but quickly, because our time's running out, what about the issue of gun laws? Can he basically write his own gun laws through executive order?
He cannot. He has to have authority with a specific congressional statute that grants him the authority. I have no idea what they're talking about. I think they need to get this passed through Congress. 70% of the American people support some kind of regulation or ban on assault weapons. It's not contrary to the Second Amendment to regulate arms. You're allowed to regulate without taking away people's right to own. There's no reason for people to own assault weapons at all, but at least they have to be highly regulated with background checks, as I believe all guns should be registered the way you have to register to drive a car. That's my view.
And on that, you and I...
Contrary to the we can disagree on that, but that's not contrary to the Second Amendment to regulate without taking away people's right to own.
But not via executive order. That we agree on.
We got to end it there. But listen, you and I will agree to disagree on that. Thanks, Lanny.